Welcome to Thoughts and Ideas with Abdullah Samir.
Episode 2, Glitches in the Matrix.
Glitches in the Matrix. So it's interesting that sometimes, I reflect back on my life as a Muslim and I wonder, was there any indication back then that I could have seen that Islam was false? And sometimes what happens is something that I call like a glitch in the matrix. Something happens to show you that the world that you believe that you've lived in, that you're living in, the reality that you've constructed around you is actually not true. And for me personally, I'm going to share some of my personal glitches in the matrix. And sometimes it sounds funny because these are like small little subtle things. Usually they're not like huge groundbreaking like discoveries or and sometimes you'd even laugh and say, I can't believe this ex-Muslim dude is picking on something as like silly as that. They sound silly, but there's actually a lot of wisdom in the fact that your mind is trying to make sense of the world and is trying to build a coherent reality, a reality that coheres, that's consistent and that makes sense. And whenever you find things in the world that don't cohere nicely, that's when you have cognitive dissonance, right? That's when things, they don't click together the way you want them to. And when that happens, you have cognitive dissonance where you're holding two simultaneous, positions that contradict each other, right? And so you're basically, you're holding contradictory values. And but we do this as human beings. We're able to hold contradictory values that they don't add up together, yet you hold both of them to be true at the same time. And we do this all the time. We compartmentalize our beliefs, especially religious beliefs, and we put them in a box. And even if they don't, like, for example, you have, pharmacists and biologists, right? And they're working in either they're giving out, either distributing medicine that, is fundamentally based on, how evolution works and natural selection and how, the antibiotics, as you use them too much, the bacteria will evolve and will gain a resistance to the antibiotics. So it's funny how you can be using these things that are based on science and things that we've discovered and are very much thanks to the theory of evolution. Yet on the other hand, you'd believe that Adam and Eve were made fully formed by God, and there's no such thing as evolution, right? You'll only believe in, let's call it microevolution, but you won't believe in macroevolution. So that's an example of cognitive dissonance. So we humans are very good at that. We are able to hold contradictory values at the same time, and it's funny, but that's how we are. So what are the glitches in the matrix that happened to me? One example was, as a Muslim, there's a dua you say when you travel, Subhanalladhi sakhalana hada wa ma kunna lahu muqrinin wa inna ila rabbina lamunqalimun. It's not actually a dua. People call it a dua. It's actually an adhkar, which is like a remembrance of God. It means glory be to God who, gave us control over this thing, something like that. So basically, you're remembering God. Everything that you do in Islam, you're supposed to remember God. When you wake up, you're supposed to remember God. When you travel, you're supposed to remember God. When you go on an animal, when you have sex with your wife, you're supposed to remember. Everything you do when you buy a slave, you're supposed to remember God. So this was one of the ways. But the thing is, what Muslim speakers and preachers and scholars will teach you is that they'll say things like, if you don't say this, something bad can happen. Your protection won't be there. And for example, Ayatul Kursi is supposedly supposed to protect you at night until morning. And there's a bunch of things that are taught. Some of them from the Hadith directly. Some of them just kind of like, they become cultural kind of understandings. And I remember once I went for Fajr at the masjid, which is the dawn prayer, the early morning prayer around 5 o'clock or whatever. And I remember that there was a guy there and he was like telling me the story of how he was going for Fajr. I believe it was in Ramadan too. And he was so tired, he got into a car accident because he was, fasting all night, all day, and then waking up early in the morning to get Allah's reward in the masjid. So it was a huge sacrifice he was making, and he totaled his car, right? It's completely destroyed his car. And you think like, wow, people are like actually doing all these things, yet God is like, well, look what's happening to them. So the same idea, a little bit more abstracted, was like, do people that say that this adhkar, does it protect them in any ways? And I was having doubts about that because I was thinking, I know lots of Muslims that get into car accidents. Like, is there any real difference in the ones that said the adhkar versus the ones that didn't say the adhkar? So my mind was trying to be scientific about it. I was trying to be logical. I was trying to make sense of my reality in a way that would cohere. And I couldn't find a way to make sense of the fact that, from what I can see, people that said the dua, adhkar, didn't have any less accidents than people that didn't. And I wanted to ask a sheikh about this in one of the classes I took. I don't remember if I did or not. That's one example. Another glitch in the matrix was when I was, there's a culture, again, I think it's like a cultural thing where you're supposed to shut the washroom doors. And, like, again, Muslim scholars will say you should always keep the washrooms shut because they have shayateen in them and stuff like that, like devils, right? And whenever you go in the washroom, you're supposed to enter with your left leg and you have this dua you say, right? You seek protection from Allah, in Allah, from the male and female shayateen, the devils, right? And it specifies male and female, which is kind of funny, male and female devils. And so, I started wondering, as a Muslim, I'm like, well, what's the point of shutting the door? Like, can't devils like go through doors? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, I'm gonna shut the door. Oh, you can't come out. The door is shut. You're locked in the washroom until I open the door again, right? It's almost like that silly, thing where people cover the musalla, the prayer mat, and they're like, they'll cover just the corner of it. It's like, yeah, I now shaitan can't pray on it, right? What? Like, it's such a silly thing. But that's more silly. This is less silly because I know more religious Muslims who actually will make sure they always shut the bathroom door when they're done, even if nobody's in it, even if like you want to air it out, you just took a shower and there's a lot of moisture and you maybe want to get the moisture out. And so but religious Muslims in my family would want to like always shut the door. So my wife, I was discussing with my wife, and she actually asked a family friend of ours, and like, what's the point of shutting the door? Like, jinns are not like locked in by physical like mortar. And the answer was something like, yeah, but if you say the dua and then you shut the door, then they can't come out. They're stuck in there. But apparently there's always a jinn following you, and apparently there's like, shaitan's always whispering in your ear. So like, if you start looking at these things, they don't make a lot of sense, right? Like, and again, not all of these things are necessarily directly from the religion, but I do believe the religion in completion, in its totality, is constructed, and it was constructed over the years by Muslim scholars, right? By muhaddithin, by the fuqaha, the scholars, like to build up this reality that we have now. And I think if Muhammad was alive today, he wouldn't recognize the Islam that we're following. Even Salafi Islam, which claims to be, strict by the book, literal, what the hadith says, I don't think that even that would be recognizable, because there's so many things that have been built up over the years, right? And that's for another day. So these are some of the glitches, and it went worse. I want to mention one more, which is very interesting, which is actually now getting much closer to when I left Islam, which is I was discussing with an atheist friend, and I was telling him, don't you know that they did a study on prayer, and the two groups, the one that was prayed for, they got better faster. So the prayer had a healing effect, right? And I was thinking, I'm going to convince this dude, right? And little did I know, this dude was like Mr. Skeptic himself. He's very critical, and he thinks about these things, and he looked it up. And it turned out the experiment what I thought was a scientific study was a joke. It was actually like, it was like a practical joke they were playing or something. Like, it's so funny. I'll have to find that and link it. And then even worse than that, when I looked into it further, like the Harvard prayer study, it shows the opposite. It shows that one, prayer had no effect, like literally no effect. Two, the people that were prayed upon, it actually took them longer to get better because apparently they felt some sort of anxiety about people praying for them, and they felt they need to, there was, for whatever reason, which is, and the study was done by, I think it was paid for by the Templeton Foundation, which is a Christian group. So they were hoping to get some evidence to show that, you know, prayer is a good thing. And unfortunately, it went the opposite direction. So that was like one of the final, you know, glitches in the matrix for me, because, you know, we think that the world that we're living in, the reality we have constructed for ourselves is true. But it's actually, a lot of the times it's not. And these little inconsistencies is what helps us to determine that the reality we've constructed is not true. My new reality that I live in, you know, I'm an atheist, I guess you can call me a materialist. For now, what makes sense to me is that all that exists is this material world around us, right? Like, this is what we have, this is an existence. And unless and until I find another reason to believe otherwise, I'll believe that this is all there is, right? Reality is material. And, you know, my reality is consistent. As far as I can tell, it's much more consistent than it was before. And it makes a lot more sense to me now, and it's much more coherent than it ever was before. So yeah, that's it. Please share your glitches in the matrix. Let me know what glitches you found in the comments. I'd love to hear, you know, what little things, it doesn't have to be a huge thing like you found out the whole Islam is true, false. Like, what small things that, you know, made you doubt. Just small things, like little glitches, let's call them. As silly as they sound, what poked holes in the thick canopy of Islam? What was it, right? What poked holes in there that helped you to see your way through Islam, or religion in general, not just Islam. Thanks for watching. Bye.